before I introduce our speaker for this evening. We do have another event on Thursday evening. Alex Schust will be coming and talking about McDowell County. He's written several books on the coal industry there and communities there, and he's going to talk a little bit about genealogy, but probably broader than that, probably talk about the coal industry and its impact on the county and vice versa. So if you have a chance this Thursday evening, Alex Schust will be with us. In the upcoming months, I'm just going to note a couple of these. We have some really good lectures and workshops coming up. On October the 11th, and important to note that our October workshop will actually be the second Tuesday of the month because we will be closed for Election Day on October 4th. So please note on your calendars, the next lecture will be on October the 11th, and that will be at 6 p.m. Of course, Dr. Phil Stern will be talking about slavery in the Ohio and Kanawha River valleys, so that should be very interesting. In November, on November 1st, Merle Cole, who has recently retired and returned to West Virginia, is going to be coming in and talking about the history of the state police, and he's done a lifetime of research on that particular topic, so we'll look forward to him. I did want to note a couple of our genealogy club events on October the 13th. Nancy Sparks, and I don't have the whole story on this, but she's going to talk about DNA, about disease, ailments, different things like that. So it sounds like a fascinating topic. I'm sorry I don't have more information on that, but if you want to know more, call Bobby Taylor sometime this week, and he can tell you a little bit more about that. But that should be fascinating. And then on November the 10th, Kitty Vaughn Cole will be talking about new features on the Family Search Program. So we have some really interesting workshops, and I want to express my appreciation for your support, for coming out and supporting our workshops, lectures. If you have ideas, certainly we're always looking for persons to come in and present those. I also want to note, Rick, for Rick Grayhouse's benefit, that the 17th Annual Roane County Genealogy Fair will be Saturday, September 24th. So Saturday, September 24th from 9 to 3 in Spencer, the Roane County Genealogy Fair. And he did want me to note that they will have available for sale 1903 farm maps showing farm plats for Roane, Calhoun, Ritchie, and other counties. So something of interest. It is a really nice event, as I said, September 24 in Spencer. Well, we are really fortunate to have with us this evening somebody who's been a longtime friend of Archives and History, a frequent patron here of our library, and certainly a great supporter. Bob Beanblossom is the District Administrator in Southern and Eastern West Virginia for the state's Division of Natural Resources, Parks and Recreation section, and he has a fascinating lecture for us this evening on the history of the state parks in West Virginia. Mr. Beanblossom holds a bachelor's degree in forest recreation and has a lifelong interest in forests and conservation. As a youth in 1971, he was one of 15 winners nationwide of a National Conservation Award sponsored by the Isaac Walton League of America, and he spent the summer working at Monongahela National Forest. After working part-time as a forest fire tower observer while in college, he became a forest ranger in his native Mingo County. He later spent 9 years as a park superintendent, first at Panther State Forest and later at Waters Smith Memorial State Park, before becoming district administrator in 1989. He's written a number of articles about the park system for different publications, including Golden Seal and Wonderful West Virginia, and he is the editor of the 3rd edition of Histories of the Southeastern State Park Systems, which was published in 2011. We are very honored to have with us this evening Mr. Bob Beanblossom.
Thank you, each of you, for coming out this evening. I'm honored. I thank you. I sincerely mean that from the bottom of my heart. And thank you for that introduction. Although after that, I sort of feel like I should come to you horizontally rather than vertically. So, but anyway, I want to talk a little bit about the history of the state park system. And to begin, I'd like to go all the way back to 1864. let's start our story there. We could go back a little bit farther, but that's a good starting point in my mind. At the height of the Civil War, and largely due to growing concerns about resource depletion, two very significant events happened in that year that sort of laid the groundwork for our present-day conservation and wildland recreation policies. George Perkins Marsh published his monumental treatise on the environmental impacts of human activities on our environment, and the federal government granted to the state of California the Yosemite Valley and Mariposa Grove of sequoias for public use, resort, and recreation. Marsh's book, Man and Nature, laid the foundation for what we know as utilitarian conservation, that is, a wise use for natural resources for our benefit, especially the economic benefit of mankind. The Yosemite Grant was the first major action in federal wildland preservation for recreational purposes. This book and the grant signaled the start of a new era in American land policy, one in which abundant resources were no longer taken for granted, and one in which increasingly active steps were taken to secure both economic and aesthetic benefits from the land. These twin approaches of addressing concerns about resource depletion continue to grow and gain widespread acceptance throughout America. By the turn of the century, this concept pretty much had filtered down to the individual state level. As early as 1897, the West Virginia legislature had provided for a game and fish warden, and by the 1910s, largely in response to the Federal Weeks Act, the legislature had initiated steps to begin protecting our forests from fire. By the 20s, the concept of conservation was well established as public policy here in West Virginia. As a matter of fact, through the 20s, there was an organization called the West Virginia Wildlife League that had chapters in every county of the state. And they were very active politically, and they were very successful in getting candidates who supported the cause of conservation elected to the legislature all through the 20s. The 1921 legislature placed the administration of forest, game, and fish laws in a 3-member board named the Game and Fish Commission of West Virginia. This commission decided that 10% of all hunting and fishing license money should be set aside to acquire land, and the state's first area, Seneca State Forest, was purchased in April 1924. Two other events at that time would also have a very profound impact on creating our state park system. The state was led by a progressive Republican governor by the name of Ephraim F. Morgan. Now, that name may be familiar to many of you in this room, because I gave this talk down in southern West Virginia, down at Williamson a few months ago, and it was still remembered down there, because Morgan was the governor who called out federal troops against the striking coal miners during the Battle of Blair Mountain. But Morgan also had a progressive side. He's remembered for a couple of other things: the launching of a new highway system, the raising of sufficient revenues to begin construction of our state capitol, and he also was noted for something else. Being the progressive thinker that he was, Governor Morgan appointed a State Park and Forest Commission in 1925. This commission was directed to study and investigate the needs and opportunities to create forests, parks, and game preserves. They were required to file a comprehensive report with their recommendations by the 1927 session of the legislature. In the report that the commission filed, they recommended creation of a comprehensive conservation agency, This became the Conservation Commission, which was ultimately established in 1933. And they also suggested that large areas of outstanding scenic and natural areas be secured before commercial exploitation made their purchase difficult. Some of the areas identified in that 27 report was a place called Spruce Pine Hollow in Meadow Branch Valley in Morgan and Berkeley counties, which ultimately became Kekeepin State Park, Cooper's Rock and Cheat Lake, Cranberry Glades, an area near White Sulphur Springs at the intersection of the Midland and Seneca Trails, which ultimately became Greenbrier State Forest, Pinnacle Rock, Blennerhassett Island, Hawk's Nest, and a couple others. All of these areas have since been acquired either by state or federal land management agencies. The second event occurring here in West Virginia about the same time was the formation of the Droop Mountain Battlefield Commission. This was largely at the insistence of a political leader from Braxton County by the name of John Sutton. Now, I can't prove this, but what I think Sutton's interest was, he had fought there for the Union Army as a private during that battle, which was in November of 1863. And I sort of think he possessed probably a little bit of nostalgia for his youth and for the role he played. So he pushed for the establishment of Droop Mountain. And acquisition of Droop Mountain was the first instance where the term state park was used. Not, of course, probably most of us in this room realize the 30s, however, is when our state park system really began to develop and take shape. State parks were developed solely as a response to a tremendous social problem, which was, of course, the need to eradicate the vast unemployment created by the Great Depression. Think about it, really, parks were really an afterthought. The primary objective of the Emergency Conservation Works Act was to put young men to work doing unproductive public projects. The Emergency Conservation Works Act, it wasn't called the CCC then, passed Congress on March 31st, 1933. The first camp was near O'Reilly, Virginia, on the George Washington National Forest on April 4th, 1933. How's that for quick governmental action? Of course, most of you are probably familiar with all of the things that the CCC did. If you come to one of our state parks today and stay in one of the modern, in one of our standard log cabins, you're staying in a cabin that was constructed in the 30s by the Civilian Conservation Corps. If you visit the office at Babcock, the office at Holly River or Watauga, for example, you're going into a structure that was constructed in the 30s during the CCC days. They planted millions of trees. They built roads and fire trails, constructed fire towers, and very significantly fought forest fires. Most of you realize this, but a little known fact about the CCC that I always was kind of interested in is that you got to remember, then as now, federal funds do not come without strings attached. Basically, the federal government told the states, remember West Virginia had one or two areas, that was acquired during the 20s. The feds basically said, look, we're going to give you this program. We're going to pour millions of dollars in your state. We're going to put your young people to work. But the work has to be done on public lands. So every state hurriedly went out, including West Virginia, and acquired lands for state parks. The 1934 legislature appropriated $75,000 for this purpose. That's true in every state that I can find, with the exception, of course, of Tennessee. And there it was only the Tennessee Valley Authority, which was another New Deal program that spurred Tennessee to act, rather than the CCC. But by the end of the decade, more than 350,000 West Virginians were visiting West Virginia state parks annually. And cabin rentals had increased from 216 weeks in 1937 to 874 weeks in 1940. What happened? All of this tremendous growth and popularity of the West Virginia State Park system came to a grinding halt with the onset of World War II. The CCC program ended in July of 1942, and wartime travel restrictions reduced the number of day-use visitors to West Virginia state parks. I found it kind of interesting, for example, to look at Hawks Nest. They had 148,000 visitors in 1941, compared to 47,000 in 1942. But now later in the war, that did change a little bit because recreation was very important, not only for the home front, but for the troops. And our state parks, along with many others, became destination areas, particularly for young soldiers to get away. And so the numbers went back up a little bit later in the war. It's also interesting to note that the state park system hired the first female superintendent about this time because of the manpower shortage brought about by the war. Remember, I told you a while ago that Droop Mountain was the first place where the term state park was first used. It also has two other notable firsts. It was the first place that a black superintendent was employed, and it was the first place where this female superintendent was hired during the war. But there's sort of a little interesting story about it. Then as now, state salaries were typically pretty low. Her husband was superintendent at Droop Mountain, and they were struggling on the state salary. So what did he do? He just quit and took another job. He didn't tell him he quit and continued to draw paper checks. Well, his wife picked up the trash, cut the grass, and mailed the reports to Charleston. When they discovered the fraud, she had done such a good job, they hired her. So that's how the park system got its first female superintendent. Following the war, America switched back to a peacetime economy, but as you know, we did return to the Depression because there was an extraordinary demand for all consumer goods and services, including public recreational facilities. It was inevitable that West Virginia also be caught up in this surge, but another parallel event was also taking place here in West Virginia, and that was the first major mechanization of the coal industry. Consequently, West Virginia's economy was suffering severely. With the need to create a more diversified economy because the coal industry was collapsing and the demand for more parks and public recreational facilities, it was inevitable that attention be focused on the system. In fact, it became a campaign issue in the race for governor in 1952. Candidate William Marlin pledged, if elected, to find a method for needed improvements and additional parks. In 1953, he was successful in getting the West Virginia legislature to give the park system authority to sell revenue bonds. The sale of these bonds in 1955 and 56 enabled the park system to construct lodges at Blackwater Falls, Cacapen, and now defunct Mont Chateau State Parks, as well as cabins and many other facilities. Marlin was truly an interesting character. He was a brilliant man, and he was very much ahead of his time. In his first major speech to the West Virginia legislature, he literally dropped a bombshell. He proposed a severance tax on coal, timber, and other natural resources. So strong was his opposition to the proposal that without a doubt it contributed to his continuing bout with alcoholism. But Marlin liked the park system, and he particularly liked Watoa. There was a cabin up there that was called the Governor's Cabin, because he was out there to stay. They tell this great story about this individual, this assistant superintendent manning the office one day. This lady came in and she was angry, to put it mildly. She had been trying to fish and they were two drunks out in a boat cussing and screaming and carrying on something terrible, and she demanded to see the superintendent. Well, you see where this story's going, I know. The assistant replied, "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but one of the individuals in that boat is the superintendent." And of course, she said, "You wait till I get home, I'm going to write to the governor." And he said, "Man, the second individual is." 8 years after he left the governor's office, he was discovered driving a taxi cab by a reporter in Chicago, Illinois, in March of 1965. He made a brief comeback, but died of cancer in November of that year. But, you know, as I said, he was really brilliant. He was ahead of his time. Economic diversification, severance taxes, desegregation. He viewed the Brown versus the Board of Education decision in 1954 simply as the law of the land, and we will comply. And West Virginia was quietly integrated. The park system, what de facto segregation we had, was quietly done away with. But Marlin pursued his aspects of industrial and economic development with such vigor that two governors in two other states, Massachusetts and Connecticut, actually lodged formal complaints against him, and he was politely told to stay out of our state and trying to quit stealing our business. Well, West Virginia's changed governors in 1957, but economic conditions continued to decline. The Underwood administration was compelled to address this situation, and Underwood persuaded the 1960 legislature to fund a program called the State Temporary Economic Program, or STEP for short, because it provided a step up. The program was a public works program designed to put unemployed coal miners to work at $1 an hour, to improve facilities of state parks and forests and fire control establishments administered by the Conservation Commission. They didn't think anyone would work, but men lined up by the hundreds, and you could only work 1,200 hours or earn $1,200 before you were cut off the program, because there were so many people needing work. Under this program, trails were built, campgrounds were constructed, major repairs were made to park buildings, and swimming pools at North Bend and Bluestone were built. At the change of administrations in 1961, the program was largely continued under a new name called the Emergency Employment Program, combining state and federal funds. But both of these programs expanded the park system more in camping than in any other single facility. Campgrounds were constructed at Blackwater Falls, Holly River, North Bend, and Babcock, in most of the state forests, including Kanawha, Panther, Seneca, and Cooper's Rock. The next major wave of development of the park system came in the 1960s. The presidential race in the spring of that year propelled West Virginia into the national spotlight. In the end, Hubert Humphrey lost the primary to John F. Kennedy. They had butted heads up in Wisconsin. And of course, the issue was religion. Kennedy was a Catholic, and the common belief at the time was that a Catholic could not be president. Well, Kennedy won in Wisconsin, but he won by carrying all I believe it was 8 out of 13 congressional delegates that were heavily Catholic. So it wasn't a decisive win. So he came to West Virginia. He knew he had to win here, or he was out of the race. He won. He won brilliantly, and he proved that a Catholic could run in a heavily Protestant state like West Virginia. And for that, he was eternally grateful. And he was, one reason he won is that I think he was genuinely moved by what he saw here at the time and the economic conditions. So he poured hundreds of millions of dollars into West Virginia. William Barron was elected governor that year, and Barron did something a little differently. Barron put a state federal liaison in Washington, D.C. A man by the name of Bob McDonough, who actually won, or was Kennedy's campaign manager, and it was McDonough that almost single-handedly won the state for him. Well, there was some interest in creating or expanding the park system for economic diversification. There was another gentleman about that time that was real interested. His name was William Faulkner, John Faulkner, excuse me. Faulkner was the editor of the Hinton Daily News. And the Hinton Daily News was the first newspaper to endorse Kennedy in the 1960 primary. So Faulkner was pushing for this park on the rim of the New River Canyon. So they were making this effort to find federal monies to build these used parks. And the feds wasn't too keen about giving poor little old West Virginia money for a state park system. So Barron flew to D.C., scheduled an appointment, and he and McDonough went over to the Oval Office and laid out their predicament. In Barron's words, he doesn't even know who he called. Kennedy picked up the phone, calling the appropriate individual, and said, "I'm sending the governor of the state of West Virginia over. Give him his $24 million for state parks." And that's the way we got Twin Falls, Pipestem, Canaan Valley, the lodge at Hawks Nest, and the expansion of Cass, Walnut. One phone call. With a robust economy spurred by the Vietnam War and its aftermath, combined with numerous federal programs implemented during the 60s, such as the Land and Water Conservation Act of 1965, expansion and improvement of facilities in our system continued throughout the 1970s. For example, Pipestem opened Memorial Day of 1970. Also, in response to a request from the legislature to consolidate and improve the management of recreation on public lands, all of the state forests in 5 wildlife management areas were transferred from the Division of Forestry and from the Wildlife Resources section to be managed by state forests. Even today, we are responsible for the total administrative management of these areas. The 1980s was kind of a period of probably retrenchment in West Virginia. West Virginia was slammed hard by the 1981 recession. And the park system went through some very lean budgetary years in the 1880s. And gradual attrition during that time reduced the number of full-time employees by about 100. To give you an idea, I love telling this story, but to give you an idea how bad things were and how poor we were back then, I was the superintendent of Panther State Forest. We had a group camp down there then, and I would go out and lead night hikes and conduct some programming activities for 4-H groups, for Boy Scouts, so forth, that were using the group camp. Well, I started up there one night, and there was a long driveway leading to my residence. There was a vehicle parked there. There were two individuals that were intoxicated. They were so intoxicated that I decided they'd keep. I went on, did my night hike, got a snack, and then came back and put them under arrest. They were so drunk that I simply put them in the back of the Jeep I was driving. I didn't put any cuffs on them. They went right back to sleep. If you've ever been up 52 to Welch, you come across Premier Mountain before we get down into town on Welch. Just as we was coming across the top of Premier Mountain, one of the drunks woke up enough to look around and say, "Will this damn vehicle get us to the jail?" It was that bad. But we made it. In efforts to control spending during the 90s, the Capron administration was kind of difficult to work with. In 1994, they proposed to the legislature that we should reduce the park system by eliminating or closing day-use state parks and forests. That effort failed. In 1995, the administration came back again and once more made an attempt to reduce it by privatizing all of the lodge parks. That effort failed. During the years, the prevalent attitude was that the park system cost too much money to operate and taxpayers could no longer provide funding for it. So what do you think happened in 1996, which was an election year, by the way? The legislature provided us with $44 million to initiate another major expansion program. And we developed some additional conference space at Blackwater and Cacapen, and we worked on dams. We built cabins to comply with the American with Disabilities Act, and did some very nice things with that money. So that pretty much brings us up to today. Also, and I'm very complimentary of the legislature in 2010, they provided us with another $52 million, which again, we were planning to do some real nice things with. The bulk of that money will go to renovate Canadian Valley Lodge and some improvements up there. If you've ever been there, you know that the lodge was built on the fly. We really didn't have enough money then to do it justice. And they built these prefabricated units, which have long outlived their usefulness. But I suspect most of you in this room realize that for a state this size, we do have a pretty outstanding park system. For a state that so consistently ranks near the bottom on almost every list, it's gratifying to know that we're at the top of this one. We operate one of the most diverse systems in the nation in terms of areas we operate and the complexity of the recreational facilities we provide. We operate 34 state parks, 8 state forests, 5 of the 66, or now I guess 72 wildlife management areas in the state, and 2 long-distance trails. On those areas, we have 7 golf courses, we have 10 lodges, with a little more than 802 rooms now, with the addition of 25 down Twin Falls since I did this, 333 cabins, 1,700 campsites, 1,000 miles of hiking trails, about 3,800 picnic tables, swimming pools, trams, tennis courts, picnic shelters, hiking trails, and even a railroad. We host about 7.5 million visitors annually, and we generate about $23 million a year in revenue. Basically, that puts us in a range of 60 to 64% self-sufficiency, while the national average for state park system actually is a little over 35%. So we do quite well. Any state park system that has ranked higher than us has had mandatory entrance fees. Their park system has a tremendous economic impact. We generate about $127 million to the economy through visitor spending each year. For the modest amount of state revenues we receive, we truly make money for the taxpayers of this state. Again, I thank you all for coming. I'm honored to have each of you. I sincerely mean that. But with that, I'll be glad to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Bob, let's go back to 1864, the publication of the book.
Yes.
The two-prong approach, the economic development and the natural protection of the environment. That's a delicate balance to do those. And how has our state been able to respect both sides of that coin?
And in some instances, I think we've done quite well. I think we've failed in others. I really do. I think face it, if you look at some of the legacy costs associated with coal mining, for example, such as environmental damage, water pollution, social costs, and so forth. Taxpayers will be paying those legacy costs for years and years and years. Yet we need energy. On the other hand, we are doing a fairly good job of maintaining our forests. We're about the third most, or second now, I guess, most forested state percentage-wise in the nation. Our park system is doing, very well. Our wildlife resources are bountiful. So there have been pluses and minuses to each side of that. I think the most important thing to take away from Marsh's book, which was called Man and Nature, is not altogether economic, but it is economic, but it's also the wise use of our natural resources. I guess that's the key to what he was trying to say.
And that's what the system tries to do.
And that's what the system tries to do. Looking at it on a broader perspective, I picked up, I was out of town over the weekend, I picked up a Columbus newspaper. There was an interesting article on there that sometime in October, I believe it may have been October 21st, there'll be a child born somewhere in the world that will mark the 7th billionth person on this planet. How long can we sustain that? And I think, worldwide population control is probably the biggest challenge to maintain the sustainability of the human race.
You mentioned the first state official of this type was a fish and game official in the 1890s.
Yeah, West Virginia, the legislature created a position of a game warden in 1897.
Was that in response to some need?
It was in response to a need, but also West Virginia had inherited actually some game laws from the state of Virginia. So of course the individual had no money. One man, in the state, he could actually do very little. And then by, I guess 1909 was a big year for timber removal in the state. Well over a billion board feet were harvested that year. And of course, in the aftermath of all of that harvesting, there was tremendous forest fires. And actually, about that time, it was a couple of years earlier, there was a devastating flood that hit Pittsburgh in the Ohio River Valley, in the Monongahela River Valley. And that flood, as much as anything, probably spurred the federal government to pass what was called the Weeks Act. this year, which it passed on March 1st, 1911, so this is the 100th anniversary of it. But the Weeks Act is probably one of the most significant pieces of environmental legislation in the 20th century, because it permitted the federal government to acquire lands for forest land, for national forests in the east. Without the Weeks Act, we wouldn't have the Monongahela, the Wayne, the George Washington, and Jefferson National Forests. And it also enabled federal funds to be matched with states for fire control.
You mentioned your book. Is that going to be available here in the gift store or in the...
What we're going to do a news release. We've got some limited copies for sale, and tell you a little bit about it. West Virginia belongs to an organization called the Association of Southeastern State Park Directors. This organization was formed in March of 1942, and the directors at that time knew that, you know, the CCC program was coming to an end, and they thought that, you know, just a loosely knit organization to share information, exchange ideas, and all would be worthwhile. That group has met every year since 1942 except one. And I guess it was 2002, the meeting was canceled because Maryland let a little hurricane keep them from hosting the meeting. But anyway, this organization in 1977 compiled a history of each of the state park systems. And then Nate Lander, who was retired as chief of Florida State Park, he was their emeritus chief then, updated it in 1992 for the centennial, or, you know, for the 50th anniversary of centennial. I always thought that I would probably get stuck one day with updating West Virginia's portion of the history if they ever did again. Well, I did the whole book for it, so it just came out. But it was a lot of fun to do, it really was. So, but we do have a few limited copies for sale. If the response is good, we're going to try and print some more.
What can we do besides being good patrons of the state park system? Are there organizations we could be supportive of, or what is available through the system, say in the foundation area or some other group?
We have, well, there are several things that come to mind. One, you know, several state parks, Canal State Forest here locally is an outstanding example, have formed friends groups or foundations. Some of those are real active. For example, Blennerhassett Island, their foundation up there contributes about, on average, 17,000 to 18,000 volunteer hours a year, the equivalent of 6 full-time positions. Of course, we have programs like the VIPP program that you can enroll in. If you visit so many parks, they will give you a nice jacket. And also we try and host an annual picnic for our volunteers, because one reason we want to do that is to keep them aware of park issues. And of course, there are times that we need public support, like any other agency in the legislature. Right now, you know, West Virginia is blessed. We still have a lot of forest land, we still have open land. We have a lot of public land compared to the population. That won't always be there. To me, the single biggest challenge of resource managers of the future will be how to keep these rural programs relevant. 80% of our population is in urban areas now. Are we going to take a kid out of a school in DC or Baltimore and bring him on a trip to a state park one time in his life and give those resources relevance? Most of us in this room, I'm sure, grew up day-to-day exposure to the outdoors. It's once or twice going to do it. It's going to be a challenge. It's going to be difficult. You know, there's a lot of needs that park system has. There's a lot of challenges. Another one that comes to my mind along the same lines, go to any state park. They all look like all of us in this room. How do we make parks relevant to an increasingly diverse society? Those are some real challenges that resource managers of the future are going to have. Yes.
You said you manage some of the wildlife management areas. Why do you do some and not others?
What happened? There in the mid-70s, the legislature was really not satisfied with DNR's approach to recreation, quite frankly. They were highly critical of it. And they thought that a more consolidated effort would be in order. We picked up the recreational areas that had some major recreational development. For example, Berwyn and Laurel Lake and in Mingo and McDowell counties had legislative appropriations to construct public swimming pools. That really wasn't in the mission of the Wildlife Resources section. So those two areas were transferred, you know, to us, primarily for that reason. Bluestone Wildlife Management Area, we had, although they're primitive, there are over 300 campsites in that facility. So it was felt that parks could better manage those. And then the other one was Plum Orchard. And then the fifth one that we picked up was changing the name of Panther State Forest to Wildlife Management Area because of the federal audit. Okay. Yes?
Which park is the most popular in terms of visitors?
Chief Logan.
Pardon me?
Chief Logan. It is probably the most popular. Of course, now you must bear in mind, we get 550,000 visitors a year, but it's the same 3,000 or 4,000 people coming out from Logan every day. I say that somewhat facetiously, but that park plays a very vital role in that area. It's the only recreational facility available, and it's heavily used. And we count the number of visits. So that's why it's so high. And then pipe stand and of course Hawk's Nest is very popular too.
Would you share with your audience a little bit about your firefighting experience out west? I don't know if a lot of people understand the commitment and the sacrifice you made over the years doing that. But I mean, this is a tremendous.
Well, I'm not sure I'm going to call it a sacrifice because I really enjoy it. But my first interest was, you know, I've divided my professional forestry career between fire and recreation. The park system was a better opportunity, but I really enjoyed my fire control days early in my career, and I never lost an interest in it, and been kind of active even here in West Virginia down through the years. But I always regretted never having the opportunity to go out west. So in 2000, I passed the physical required for a fire crew and went out on a fire crew to Wyoming. Since that time, I got involved in public information and fire prevention activities. And I've did assignments now, I don't know, 16, 17 states. I've been everywhere from Georgia to Alaska to California to Minnesota to Louisiana. I spent 18 days on the wildfire back in June in Arizona, which was the largest fire in Arizona history. So it's been an exciting time. I've really enjoyed it. I've got to meet and work with great people throughout the United States. I've had a couple of interesting experiences. One I'll tell since my wife's not here tonight, but for example, I was on a fire in California, and I noticed this real attractive lady walking toward me. And I thought, gosh, she looks familiar. I must have already made note of her around the fire camp. Well, she came up and struck our hand and said, hello, I'm Ann Curry with NBC News. So it's been a lot of fun, really has. I went to Louisiana after Hurricane Katrina, or Hurricane Rita, excuse me. Went over to a place called Cameron Parish and slept on the ground in a tent. Well, slept in a tent for about 14 days. That was really an interesting experience and very rewarding. Idaho, I just met some real great people. Another real nice story is that this couple was getting married. And so they died, the fire messed up their wedding plans, so they donated their food to the firefighters, 300 steak dinners. Well, we really didn't need that, to be honest with you. But you don't want to make them feel bad. I mean, every firefighter, I swear, I believe they get 6,000 calories a day. That's the biggest hazard I've faced, is eating too much. But anyway, I went over there, that thing, because we did want to show our support and appreciation for what they'd done. And I've been hearing this talk about this individual. And I didn't even know who they were talking about. So I went over and got dinner and thanked the bride and groom for what they'd done and everything, and went and sat down, and this guy came over and he said, oh, West Virginia. He said, I grew up in Wheeling. He said, my name's Scott Glenn. Well, does anyone know who Scott Glenn is? He's, if you've ever watched the movie The Right Stuff, he played Alan Shepard, I guess, in that movie, and then he played the old man in Knights of Rodanthe, I think was his most recent film. So it's not really been a sacrifice. I feel like a good time. Honestly, I have. And I was hoping, to be honest with you, I was hoping I wouldn't be here tonight. I was hoping to be in Texas. I can tell you that now that this is over with. Any other questions? Again, thank you all so much for coming.